that a household engages with to earn their basic needs, their means of living, food, shelter, clothing, and it's usually practiced in a repetitive pattern, sometimes throughout the year, sometimes seasonally, but there's a kind of pattern to it. And that's a reminder to switch off your cell phone. The fact that it's repetitive and it meets your basic needs, it gives the household a certain character, it becomes a way of life. So therefore, livelihood is not just a set of economic activities to earn a living. After a while, it becomes a way of life. So that's how, when we're dealing with, say, fisher folk on the, say, the coast of Orissa, there's a certain whole pattern of living, in which going out to the sea at 3 a.m., coming back at 3 p.m., all the fisherwomen, standing at the landings, taking away the fish, selling the fish by 5 p.m., the men then getting drunk happily, and then again getting ready for their 3 a.m. excursion. And this being done round the year except in the heavy monsoons. It becomes a way of life. And the same, for weavers, and the same for agriculturists, and same different for landless laborers and so on. So it's therefore becomes a way of life, and therefore becomes your culture, your place in society, your identity, and so on. It requires all those secondary and tertiary attributes because of that. Only 10 minutes talk to you about the algebra of livelihood, which was actually not really an original piece. It was work that we had done over several years, including with the colleagues in SERP and AP Maths and mathematical language. So first of all, 3 assertions about the livelihood of the poor. The first is that the poor are almost always working or available for work. In other words, they're too poor not to work. They'll starve after a few days. They work but often earn very low incomes if self-employed, or low wage rates if wage employed. And these therefore are often below subsistence level, and that's what explains the fact that if you look at unemployment rates, even the tightest measure of unemployment, which is the current daily status, it's rarely more than 9%. So how do you explain that only 9% are unemployed, but 42% are poor? I think there is this, in between people who are the working poor. They're working, and probably working all the time and working harder than most of us, but not earning enough, not living wage. And the other point I want to make is that the poor, so a typical household may be engaged, for example, in cultivation, either their own land or leased in land or enclosed land, except for totally landless farms. They engage in non-farm based labor, construction, services, either within the village or nearby towns or big cities. They engage in livestock rearing simultaneously while doing all this, or fishing in some places. If they are living near forests, they engage in collection of non-timber forest produce. Maybe a few days a year, but whether it's timber leaves or whether it's snow. And people eke out a living. So what is the livelihood promotion challenge? Now let's assume that the number of activities that a household is engaged is in n, I going from 1 to n. So, and let's assume that the gross revenue per day, gross income per day from each activity J is GJ, gross. Now, to engage in any activity, there is a cost. So we have to deduct that cost, and let's say cost per day of each activity J is CJ. So basically the net income is GJ minus CJ, which is the term in the bracket. The risk of failure is R. The risk of not failing is 1 minus R. Okay, R will be between 0 and 1.0. So then J minus CJ in the bracket multiplied by 1 minus RJ, which is the risk adjusted income per day multiplied by the number of days you engage in that activity. Now there is a simple assumption, a simplifying assumption here, that the income level per day remains constant, although there are some cases where even that varies, in which case we could handle it by making it into another J. So now, if you look at this equation, and the Y, capital Y is the total household income. So it's this summation of from 1 to n, J equal to 1 to n of the expression. Now just stare at this equation. What can you do? Well, you can either increase GJ, or reduce CJ, or reduce RJ, or increase BJ, or increase N. Mathematically, there is no sixth solution for this. So suddenly, actually, it becomes kind of, wow. In a sense, being constrained is being free, because then you know that this is all you can do, and then you go for it. So that's the four things that your option. Increase two things, reduce two things, and increase N, which means the number of activities, actually is diversification, and that we've learned over the years should be the last strategy, and I'll come to that. Everybody okay so far?
Just to add that, sir.
Yeah.
The J wave can actually there is 10 into 4, 40 possibilities.
Yeah, sure. Right. Within each activity, right? True. So there's a lot to do.
If N is more also, there is also a higher risk possibility.
Sorry?
If the N is more diversification.
Yeah, so it could increase the risk also. So now I won't go into the details of this, but let's take one example of, say, agriculture. And if you want to increase GJ, so what can you do? You want to increase the gross return from cultivation, which means increasing productivity per acre, which can be done through improving agronomic practices and or switching to higher yielding varieties and or adding irrigation facilities. Of these, the first should be tried first, etc. So actually, it becomes 40 plus, because within each there are multiple. So that's why we development was always busy and always full of new project ideas. Because even if we try 3 things under each, and there are, let's say only 5 activities per household. So 20 into 4 into 20, 4 into 5 is 20 into 3. So 66 so we have to try. So at least one idea for every week plus more. So now within that, of course, there are issues of capital requirements. So some things you could try with just more labor, deploying, selecting the right seed rate, correct seed depth, timely weeding. All of this requires changes in practices, but doesn't require any more expenditure or anything. You could switch to better varieties, but there is more cost, and often it may require some fertilizer. And then adding irrigation is of course a big step, but it's capital intensive. Now, it sounds like one minor line item, but I tell you, I spent the first 5 years of my life in the Bihar, and those days Jharkhand and Bihar were the same, in South Bihar, trying to build small lift irrigation schemes for near landless households and tribal households. Along small perennial or semi-perennial streams. Little intake wells by the side which are called canneries, and then either putting a lathakudi there, the manual way of taking out water if the stream is not too deep, or if the head is more than say 5 meters, then bringing in a small portable engine. In those days there used to be a Villiers engine, only 3.5 kilos, only 35 kilos, and you could carry it on your shoulder. It used to be petrol start and kerosene run, and take it from country to country. For the first 6-7 years, I used to call it, agriculture development or irrigation or whatever one was actually doing. बाद में we started calling it livelihood. So that's the time when Robert Chambers had all of this. So in other words, you can see that while the construct is simple, the intervention can be complex. And God help you, by the way, if you want to do irrigation on land where the water course is disputed, the guys downstream don't want you to lift water, or where you need electricity because diesel is now just too expensive, or the head is just too high and the complexity just increases. The whole idea of trying to improve the gross income of a smaller marginal farmer, this is what you end up doing. Or let's go to say decreasing risk in agriculture. So again, you can do it through better agronomic practices. Deep plowing helps, moisture conservation, weeding helps, timely irrigation, even if it is protective irrigation, helps. Harvesting at the appropriate time helps. Simple thing like, this is one SMS to farmers saying, "Do din mein pala padne wala hai, go for it, and cut your wheat." Can save 10-15% of the crop. Then looking for alternatives, and found in the Mysore library, one Diwan Chakravarti of the Mysore state had written a monograph in 1921 on something called rainfall index based problem. And then we did 3 years of experimentation around it. Fortunately, the World Bank came to hear of it, and the rest is, went from 20 farmers to 2,000 to 20,000, and now it's 2 million farmers, although we are still at an experimental level of about 10,000 farmers. This is a Harvard Business School case, by the way, on how basics design the weather insurance product. So each of these things can get to be pretty complex. And by the way, worthy of all the smarts that you MBAs have. Okay? You guys think that the greatest challenges are in the corporate sector? Try and don't work here, man. The level of complexity that you have to deal with in development is orders of magnitude higher. And that's because the variables are not under your control. There's that was only the household income. But ultimately, there are various expenditures that a household incurs. One of them is consumption expenditure. The other is health. Third is say marriage or social expenditure. Just give it 3 examples. So the household surplus S is actually Y minus C minus H minus M. What can you do about consumption expenditure? Can you reduce it? If you reduce it by reducing quantity, that's not fair. But you can reduce consumption expenditure, for example, by pooling the requirements of all the poor households in a region and buying in bulk, buying food grain or also prophylactics, safe drinking water, immunization, the works. But once that is done, then things like health insurance. Out of that comes the great idea of the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana. What can you do about social expenses of marriage? Anyone can give me an answer? lots of poor people become even poorer at the end of a marriage because they are son or daughter or a death leaves. Abolish them? Huh? No, there is no dowry. This is just the feast.
And ECG members helping each other to manage them all.
To cut costs. So basically some kind of community self help. Okay. So one practical Gandhian Lognathanji, this is one of the things he does. He goes around organizing community marriages. Pretty rigorous data because all the organizers were there and so on. They'd save 25 lakhs of rupees by doing that. So there's no dearth to creativity in livelihood promotion and so on and so forth. So, equation, okay? Alright. But this is not what I wanted to talk to you about. PPT off, computer off, dimag chalo. Alright. And it's always amazing when you go to the etymological roots of words. I never imagined that shrug actually is a combination, it's a Sanskrit word of sat plus adhar. Sat means truth. This is a foundation. Okay. Now I have to of course go to Monier Williams. This is only Wikipedia, so this may not be authoritative. But if it is true, how do the poor cope with livelihood shocks? The last several decades have seen enormous change for all of us. But I think they've seen exceptional change for the poor. Extreme turbulence in livelihood patterns which have been around for centuries, suddenly getting wiped out. Well known in case of course, displacement of tribals, when overnight a dam is announced in their area and they're supposed to be in the submergence zone. You all know about the Narmada Andolan. But the dam is a big project. There are many, many smaller projects. More recently there was this whole madness about SEZs. And Reliance wanted to actually create something called Ambani Desh in the Raigad district of Maharashtra. They actually had a website up called Ambani Desh. But fortunately one very gutsy woman called Vijay Mahajan, no kin of mine, and the long tradition of the peasants and workers party in the Raigad district, Ambedkar district, they managed to basically defeat that idea, become unremunerated. Now, for example, in food crops, with the exception of paddy and paddy and wheat, which have moved into the high-yielding variety category. Almost all the other cereal crops are not remunerative. They are okay for subsistence. So, jawar, bajra, maize is still also remunerative. Jawar, bajra, whoever grows ragi and bamboo anymore, pulses, many of the oil seeds. So people who are growing that, they are getting out of those areas. So then there is climate change and general environmental degradation. So due to lots and lots of reasons, people are losing their livelihoods in short period of time. That's what we mean by shocks for a household. So we start with, and I'm talking about my own empirical observations, no sample survey, nothing, just roaming around for the last several years and conceptualizing that, waiting to do more rigorous field work on that. degradation. So, due to lots and lots of reasons, people are losing their livelihoods in short period of time. That's what we mean by shocks for a household. So we start with, and I'm talking about my own empirical observations, no sample surveys, nothing, just roaming around for the last several years and conceptualizing from that, waiting to do more real work on it. S. What does the S stand for, Shankar? We had agreed this morning. Starved. Well, so it's a combination of, need not always be starvation, but it could be, but at least, chronic sickness, could be bondage or slavery if you want to stay with an S, could be sex work, all along the National Highway 8 from Udaipur to Ahmedabad. The truck drivers routinely stop at dhabas, not only to have khana, but because lots of tribal women are available, for casual sex work. Okay. Eat more coarse grains, eat more PDS grains if you can get them, and then also at the end of it, still reduce the acids, sell them. To be land, more free grazing, more fungible. So, adjust within the same broad DPSA diversified portfolio that you had. Then comes, now here is the happy news, diversify. Now everybody who is diversified is not necessarily in a happy situation now. I'm talking about successful diversification. So let's go back to the same small farmer. Shankar, when was soybean introduced in India? I mean, around 80s.
This is a major thing, but
89. 89.
Of course, it's been around in Pantnagar and all since the 70s.
Yeah, but that was in the lab.
But when Indira Gandhi, Indira Gandhi was still alive. So it was.
No, it was important at that time.
81, 82, I was involved in promoting soybean.
Yeah, you're confusing 79 with 89. It was 79. When there was a major increase in price of edible oil prices went up.
Absolutely.
And someone said, so there was, till then we used to hardly have maybe 1 lakh hectares in the whole country under soybean. They decided we'll go for soybean because even though the crop is grown in the rest of the world for cattle feed, the DOLK, but here we'll grow it for the oil content. So you get 22-23% oil. Take that out. Send the rest of the DOC. It's a good export commodity. So soybean went from 1 lakh hectares to 5 million hectares. Most of Madhya Pradesh, Western Madhya Pradesh, Eastern Rajasthan, Northern Maharashtra, which had deep black cotton soils, they used to have the concept of Kharif fallow. Because deep black cotton soil, when the rain falls, it becomes too muddy to cultivate. So they would just leave it as fallow during Kharif. Some places jawar was grown, but by and large, it was Kharif fallow. So instead of that, we started doing summer season plowing, sowing of soybean, and then ready for the rains. So lots and lots of small farmers. Of course, they could do it if they were in the right place. So, for example, they went into soybean. Livelihood promotion play a role. All those questions. But I think before we do all that, we need to do some good data set analysis. Using NSS data, census data, other anecdotal data, to see if indeed these 5 capture all of it, or there are more, and whether these are adequately explained. So, theorizing on the run. Lecture over.
I think we are open for some questions. Vijay, I would also request you to perhaps during the questions speak a little bit about your Yatra experience and what you noticed with regard to livelihoods that you.
Well, this is part of it, and it's not in the blog. But those who just want to sort of keep it to the Yatra, just go to vijaymahajan.wordpress.com. But the video clips are worth it. Some of them are very telling. So some of these things are actually coming out of there. vijaymahajan.wordpress.com www. Yes.
Sir, for 1 month. So it was regarding how IGS is strategizing in Vidarbha regarding the livelihoods. We had a chance to work with the producer company there. So how IGS, company like IGS works with livelihood sector in the just wanted to know in detail.
So in 4 districts, Wardha, Yavatmal, Akola and Amravati, we set up 4 producer companies. And they're basically covering soybean and cotton. And those are the 2 main crops that grown in that area. And the logic is that, if you want to go back to the algebra of livelihoods, by aggregating the demand of small farmers, either for inputs, such as seeds, fertilizers, agrochemicals, diesel, you can buy them in bulk, you can get better quality, you can get timely supply, and so they save 5-10%. Similarly, on the output side, when they can bulk their raw produce itself, they get a slightly better price. Cotton, it is more difficult because of the peculiarities of cotton purchase in Maharashtra. But soybean, definitely 2-3% price improvement is there. And then the other benefit of aggregation is you can afford common services like extension and so on. So this is
The kind of support staff they are having is also good, but somehow something was missing. Like they are tying up with the Saguna soya mill in Ingarka in that area, but the price fluctuations in the soya mill are affecting the soya prices that Bhadrapatnam soya producer company was doing. So some link is missing somewhere.
Yeah, it's a fair point. There's people like Amul who are able to beat the price down and for procurement, but are able to sell at a high price because of the brand value. So if you're operating in the same area where Amul is procuring, so aggregation helps, but it's not always able to help. But your general point that capacity building could be done more is true always. If you could get more young professionals to come and work with us, we'll do a better job.
My name is from Assam, and I also got the chance to visit IGS Management. This is regarding the board to cope with this kind of shocks.
Where were you in Madhya Pradesh?
I went to Hoshangabad ITC livestock project in Bandhavgarh.
Okay.
The thing is, in these things that you said, the strategies, I mean, from shifting them from these below you have mentioned to them, I mean, are there certain limitations that we have to accept to get them, all the people out of poverty? I am saying in the context, sir, in the morning also, Raju sir mentioned that as well, and while discussing livelihoods, only if we concentrate on the terms of exchange and how to, I mean, aggregate people and do something to, so that they get a better price, and we just somehow write down how to give them better access to the means of production through certain amount of social action, maybe not directly, but after some amount of livelihood work has been
So
done.
why don't you just name the means of production?
I mean, access to land.
Land and what else?
Maybe access to, let us say, energy about payment is not getting, I mean, done. That is not directly means of production, but certain amount of social action.
So stay with your own analysis. You said means of production. So
Yeah.
what are the others? Land and next?
Maybe water resources, maybe that is getting, I mean,
That's
access.
kind of land. Water is that. Next, what else?
I mean, certain resources, inputs and all that ma'am also identified in the morning session. So this kind of
Inputs you can, if you have capital, you can buy it. So it's really,
yeah.
so it's land, then it's capital, and what else?
No, I mean I have mainly land in my land and water resources and all. So I'm just query. I mean, is this model can about
So let's stay with just these two, huh?
Yes.
Because when there are basically 3 or 4 factors of production. Like India 1947, China 1948. After independence or liberation, whatever you call it, first thing they tried to address was the land regulation. India abolished the zamindari system in 1950. And there was this assumption that there would be widespread redistribution of land. Did not happen. After that, state by state, they tried to enact land ceilings, tried to do rural land distribution. Vinoba Bhave walked for 16 years from 1951 to about 1967 around the country. Managed to get 42 lakh acres of donation, most of it pretty useless land, but nevertheless. Okay. So we've tried all kinds of things in this country to get the land distribution better. And what really has worked is increases in wage rates. Okay? Gift of the 20th century. What it has left for us in the 21st century are the more complex problems where there is no single variable maximization possible, where you have multiple variables to optimize. And those are the tough problems of society. You want to increase equality, you end up reducing growth. You let growth reduce. In the long run, it bashes equality because poverty doesn't go down as much as it should.